Hey there, how's it going? Fun here. Today, let's have a very brief look at an introduction to the basics of the electronics involved in radio controlled aero modeling. So, first off, let's have a little look at our transmitters. The transmitters transmit the signal. In the old days, when I started out, we used the likes of these 35 megahertz transmitter with a big aerial like that. And we had receivers a little bit like this, which had to have a matching crystal in the transmitter and the receiver. You had to have matched crystals in the transmitter and the receiver, and the aerial was like that. That's coiled up at the moment. So that was the 35 megahertz, the old system. Okay. These days, most people use a 2.4 gigahertz transmitter and receiver system instead. Here's one that I used very happily for many years, a Futaba. So it's working on 2.4 gigahertz frequency instead of 35 megahertz, which most of the modern transmitters do. And you know, you've got sticks here to control. This is going to be your throttle. That's going to be rudder, left and right. This is going to be nose down and nose up. And this is going to be ailerons right and ailerons left. To be more precise, that should be elevator, nose down, nose up. Okay. And then finally, the more modern transmitters, something a bit like this. They have lots and lots of memory for multiple different models, and they're just very good, the modern transmitters. So that's a very brief overview of the modern transmitters. Let's have a little look at some of the components now that go into your models, be they aeroplanes, cars, boats, or something else. So you're going to need a couple of things. First off, you're going to need a receiver, which is going to look something a little bit like this. Okay, that's your receiver. And there's a whole thing about how to bind. You have to bind the receiver to the transmitter. There's a little button in this particular one which you have to press when you're binding it. Okay, so then in terms of actual moving left and right and up and down, you're always going to use things called servos. This is a servo which does lefty, righty, uppy, downy. Let me demonstrate 1 second. Watch. So you have multiple servos throughout your models. In the case of some boats, there might be one servo. In the case of a plane, there are typically 3, but there could be more or less depending on what you're doing. So that's what a servo is. That's what a receiver is. Here we have the battery. LiPo, or lithium polymer, is the most popular type these days. You know, in the old days, we used to use more like a nickel cadmium battery. But that's not for here. Let's just move on and say most of us use lithium polymer or LiPo batteries these days. Here's a smaller one, here's a bigger one, and they're rated in terms of the amperage. This is 2,200 milliamps or 2.2 amps. This is 11.1 volts. Typically that will have 3 cells rated at 3.7 volts each, adding up to a nominal voltage of 11.1. And you know, the amperage is basically how long it will last for. And there's another thing called the C rating, which is how quickly and how safely it can give out the power. And the higher the C rating, the better it is. Okay, so that's 1500 milliamp. So they're LiPo batteries. Finally, but not least, you've got your speed controller, or ESC, electronic speed controller. They're going to look a bit like that. So you're going to have somewhere using typically an XT60 plug, but there are many different plugs, but that's an XT60 plug. That plugs your power in with the battery. That goes to your receiver, this servo lead, and that goes to your motor. Now, for safety in this demonstration, I'm not connecting it up to the motor now, but a motor is going to look something like this. Let's talk about that in a moment. You plug those wires in there. If your motor isn't running, perhaps there's a faulty connection on one of your wires. Also, if it's running in the wrong direction, you just unplug 2 of the wires and swap them, and that will make it run in the opposite direction. And one other thing on the subject of transmitters, there's another type here, something a bit like this, which is used for typically for cars and boats. That's going to be forwards, pull the trigger, backwards or reverse, press there, and that's going to be right and left. So I would use them on the likes of my boats and cars. 1 second, I'll just show you one of my boats, which I'm quite proud of. Check out this baby. So when you move the servo inside, this turns the rudder and the throttle turns the prop. Okay, I'm just going to put that to one side. But yeah, also most speed controllers for like a normal plane work in forwards only. But if you're going to use the likes of this bad boy for a car or potentially a boat, you might well need reverse, in which case you have to get a speed controller or ESC, which has reverse. So just very briefly, I want to look at the motors. Here's one with a propeller on. This is a brushless motor. In the older, more basic type of DC or direct current motors, there were little brushes, 2 little brushes, which took the power to the motor. These brushless motors have no brushes, and they have permanent motors on the outside. Typically, this is called an outrunner because the outside is what runs. That's got permanent magnets, and on the inside you've got little coils or electromagnets. Maybe, I don't know if you'll be able to see that there. So these have to interact with the electronic speed controller, which has very clever electronics to pulse current power to the electromagnets in a very clever way, which is way beyond the scope of this video to explain. So in terms of what goes into a plane or a car or a boat, that's the main basic bits that you're going to be encountering. And in some other vids real soon, I'm going to have a little look at the anatomy of the basics of a plane. And also then in another vid, we'll have a very quick look at some basic aeromodelling building techniques. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Oh, and of course, check out the many, many other wonderful vids on YouTube by some fierce experts who are doing wonderful tutorials. This is just a basic overview. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Bye.